What's up, y'all? Roy here, and you are listening to the Clemens with a Z podcast. Have you ever heard that old parable about the blind men and the elephant? In the parable, each one of the blind men touches a different part of the elephant: trunk, tusk, and tail. And each one swears they know what it is. It's a snake, says one. No, it's a tree. No, it's a rope. And they argue, not because they're wrong, but because they think their part is the whole. And this story has stuck with me for a while, mainly because I was one of those men. Hell, we all were. Only we weren't taught not just that we were touching the elephant, we were the only ones touching it. Everyone else lost, deceived, and in the dark. And that kind of certainty, it can feel like faith, but it's really a cage. And I also came across this quote from a 19th century Indian mystic named Ramakrishna. It kind of helps me with this parable and with life now. And he was known for seeing the divine in many religions and actually practicing several of them in his lifetime. And he said something, and when I read this quote, it wrecks me in the best way. He says, God is one, but his aspects are many. Just as a man is a father to one, a brother to another, and a husband to a third, so the one God is described in various ways according to the relationship. And what if that's it? What if God shows up differently depending on who you are? What if the Baptist is holding up one part, the Buddhist another, the atheist another, and maybe, just maybe, we're all closer to God when we listen instead of label? I mean, just think about how big this world is: different cultures, language, histories. And yet, so many of us are convinced that our path, the one we were born into or where we are, it's the only right one. I saw this post from Instagram account called Reason Reality, and they put it so plainly. And they talk about how your religion is most likely just a result of where you were born. If you were born in Saudi Arabia, you'd probably be Muslim. If you were born in Thailand, you'd probably be Buddhist. If you were born in India, Hindu. And if you were born in the American South, there's a good chance you'd be a Christian. And that hit me. I didn't choose Christianity, I inherited it. And in the ICOC, I didn't just inherit Christianity. I inherited the belief that our tiny slice of it was the only true way. And I know a lot of you listening did as well. And that's the thing about certainty. It sure does feel like faith, but it can turn into a cage. So here's the question that I want to sit with today. What happens when we mistake our piece for the whole? What does that do to our faith, to our relationships, and to our view of God? And more importantly, what would happen or what could happen if we stopped? And that's the thing. In the ICOC, we it wasn't just that we thought we had the best piece of the elephant. We were told we were the elephant. That we had the whole picture, the full truth, the complete map. Everyone else, he says it best, lies at worst. And they weren't just mistaken, they were in danger, eternal danger. I would hear this in most sermons. But it wasn't just about or the way that we talked about our church. I mean, we were it, the one true movement of God on earth. Other churches might have a few pieces of the truth, but we had the whole gospel. It was said with such confidence, like they were reading the weather report, just stating facts. And I believed it. I felt proud, special, and safe. Like I had been born on the winning team, and that all I had to do was stay here and keep my place. But like what I've been speaking about with faith and certainty turning into a cage, I mean, it's so rough because the moment you're convinced you already have all the answers, you stop listening. You stop being curious. You stop noticing the parts that don't fit your picture. Back then, if someone told me that God might show up differently to someone else, a Muslim, a Buddhist, or even another Christian, I would have laughed it off or corrected them with the scripture. The idea that God might speak to someone in a way that didn't match our framework, that wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. That's what was the ICOC mindset. We didn't just believe we were right, we believed everyone else was wrong by default. And for a long time, I never thought to question it. Because if you believe you've got the whole elephant, you don't go looking for other pieces. And if you believe that, you just guard what you've been told you already have. And so I want to go back to that post from Instagram from Reason Reality about how your religion is where you were born. Because like I said, if you were born in Saudi Arabia, you'd probably be Muslim. If you were born in Thailand, a Buddhist. Here in America, you're evangelical. And I inherited this Christianity, this ICOC. And I inherited the belief that our tiny slice was the only way. And that's the wild thing about this faith by geography idea. Most people, if they're honest, will admit that where you're born shapes what you believe. That's why we have Buddhist monks in Tibet, Catholic priests in Rome, and Hindu priests in Varanasi. It's not about who's smarter, who's holier, or who's got the real God. It's about the air you breathe growing up, the stories you're told, and the rituals that mark your life. But yeah, in our church, that logic didn't apply to us. We were told that we'd escaped that trap, that we weren't just products of our environment, because our truth again was absolute. Even if you grew up in some remote village in Africa, the only path to God still ran through us. It was like we convinced ourselves geography explained everyone else's faith, but ours had to be the exception. And here's the thing, that once I started paying attention, I realized that this wasn't just an ICOC thing. You'd hear the same mindset all over American evangelicalism. Different denominations and churches might say it with a softer tone, but the message is the same. We've got the truth, and everyone else is missing it. Sometimes it'd be framed as we're just following the Bible as it's written, or we're the ones not watering down the gospel. Other times it's subtle, jokes about those Catholics or those liberal churches or those people who believe in works instead of grace. It was all different packaging, but the same product. And the more that I've sat with it, the more absurd it sounds. Because if God is truly global, if the divine is present in every corner of creation, why would truth be locked inside the borders of one tiny group? Why would the whole elephant be standing in our little living room while the rest of the world groped in the dark? And that question, if God is truly global, then why would truth be locked in these borders? It kept coming back. And not in one big dramatic revelation, but like a slow drip of water on stone. It didn't shatter anything overnight, but it weakened the walls I had built around my faith. And these cracks weren't loud or obvious. They didn't come from one conversation, one sermon, or one book. They came from little moments stacked on top of each other. Meeting someone from a different faith who radiated more kindness than some saved people that I knew. Hearing a story about God working in a place we'd written off as spiritually dead. Noticing how often we'd explain away someone else's genuine experience of the divine because it didn't fit into our blueprint. And over time, those cracks began to connect. They formed a network of questions that I couldn't ignore. Questions that didn't make me lose faith, but made me wonder if maybe faith was supposed to be bigger, wilder, and less controllable than the version I'd been handed. And that's when the parable of the blind men and the elephant started to take on a new meaning for me. Because for so long, I thought the point of the story was to show how other people had it wrong. I thought they were the ones fumbling around in the dark, mistaking a tail for a rope and a tusk for a spear. But now I started to wonder, What if we're the ones mistaking our piece for the whole? Or worse, what if there was no single person, no single group that could ever hold the whole picture? And that thought was and is still kind of uncomfortable because, in a lot of ways, I want to be certain. I want to feel safe. But without that thought, I had that weird certainty, and that certainty meant I knew where I stood with God, what happened after I died, who was in and who was out. But these cracks in my certainty just kept widening. And the wider they got, the more light came through. It was like standing in a dark room and realizing the walls around you weren't solid after all, they were paper. And on the other side was something so much bigger than the room you've ever been told was the entire world. Something that didn't fit neatly into the borders of one group, one belief system, or one interpretation. And something that might require me to step outside into the light and admit that I didn't and couldn't see the whole elephant. So I think that maybe the point of faith was never to claim the whole elephant. Maybe the point is to stand alongside others, each holding our peace and start talking about what we see. Not to prove the others wrong, but to build a fuller picture together. To say, here's what I've seen. What about you? I wonder if maybe in the overlap of our stories, we get a glimpse of something truer than we could ever see alone. And it brings me back to the quote from Ramakrishna, where he says, God is one, but his aspects are many, just as a man is a father to one, a brother to another, and a husband to a third. So the one God is described in various ways according to the relationship. And if I look at that through my old thinking, I could see that it was soft, a way of dodging the hard lines, the absolutes. So we loved that. We loved proving the absolute, living in that. But now, without that thinking and that frame, it feels like freedom. Because if God is truly that vast, that alive, that beyond our boxes, then of course we're going to describe God differently depending on where we stand. Of course, the language and the imagery would shift. Of course, the metaphors would change from one culture to another, one century to the next. The Baptist may be holding one part, the Buddhist another, atheist another, and maybe, just maybe, God is big enough to be present in all of it. And the tragedy isn't so much that we see different parts of the elephant. The tragedy is that we spend so much time and energy guarding our own peace that we never stop to notice how much richer the view becomes when we put them together. And what if it's supposed to be designed that way? What if the fragments aren't a problem to fix, but an invitation to accept? An invitation to humility, to curiosity, to relationship? Because if God is that big, maybe the only way to truly see more of the elephant is to listen to the people we've spent our entire lives ignoring. And I go back to that point where I said that it seems that faith was never to claim the whole elephant, but it was to stand alongside others, holding our peace and talking about what we see. In the old parable, after the blind men argue about whether they're touching a snake or a tree or a rope, someone with sight finally speaks up. They tell them, you're all right and you're all wrong. You're touching different parts of the same animal. And the men fall silent, realizing that each of them have been holding a truth too small to stand on its own. But here's the thing. In real life, no one person has that kind of sight. No one gets to see the whole elephant from every angle. And that's why we need each other. That's why listening matters more than labeling, you know? So here's where I've landed. I don't want to spend my life guarding one small piece of the elephant. I don't want my faith to be so fragile that it can't stand next to someone else's truth without feeling threatened. And I definitely don't want to live in a cage of certainty that shuts out the wonder of what I might actually learn if I listen. If God is as big as I say I believe, then I have nothing to lose by being curious, and neither do you. I have nothing to lose by asking questions, and neither do you. And I have nothing to lose by saying, "Tell me what you see," and neither do you. So maybe that's where we start, not with a demand for agreement, not with a debate about who's right, but with a willingness to admit, I can't see this whole elephant from here. And maybe the act of listening, really listening, isn't just about expanding our perspective. Maybe it's one of the ways we experience God. So here's my question for you. Who have you been ignoring because you've assumed they're holding the wrong piece? And what might happen if you let them tell you about it? Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Clemens with a Z. So happy you are here sitting with us. If this episode stirred something in you, if you're starting to see the cracks in your own whole elephant story, I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Instagram by direct messaging me at the Clemens with a Z Instagram page, or you can email me at clemenswithaz@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, you can do it in a couple of ways. You can head on over to the Substack where I have devotionals and articles where I go a little bit deeper than this. Or you can support it financially by going to the GoFundMe. The link's in the show notes. Or you can head on over to clemenswithaz.com, grab some merch, something like that. Every little bit helps, and I'm grateful for it all. But most of all, just please keep listening to each other, to yourselves, to God. You never know what part of the elephant they might be holding. Peace.